Devastia. Chapter 3. Miggie ran for a long time. She ran to the city, where tall chrome buildings punctuated a gray sky. The streets were populated by large blue-skinned males with jagged, curved horns. Some were in oval vehicles, others traveled on foot or on motorized scooters. Miggie moved quickly and fearfully, avoiding the gaze of the males. She lurked in dark alleyways, inching past trash cans, and crawling up the sides of buildings. At times, she became spooked by a sudden noise or the bark of a deep male voice somewhere in the distance. Night came, and under cover of darkness, Miggie gathered up the courage to approach one of the males, a shady-looking street vendor, who had set up a cart of ill-gotten goods by the side of the road. "I need tools," Miggie said to him quietly as she approached. She had wrapped herself in an old, soiled sheet that she'd found discarded in one of the many refuse areas she had come across in the city. She used the soiled fabric to cover her colorful, ostentatious outfit. The visible patches of pale green skin that the union gown displayed might have drawn unwanted attention to her.
"Hey, you're one of those runaway brides. And yeah,"
the vendor commented. Miggie took one of her gold bracelets off and held it up for the male to see. "I need tools." "I can trade you this," Miggie said, pointing to the bracelet that she held in her hand.
"Oh, a bride's trinket. I can get a price for that,"
the vendor said, his crimson eyes twinkling with greed. He held up a black case, then unzipped it and showed her the contents within. A number of different-sized pliers, screwdrivers, and wrenches were inside, as well as a small soldering iron and a metal prod used for initiating electrical current into a mechanical device.
"Is this what you want?"
the male asked. Miggie nodded and then threw her bride's trinket down onto the floor. While the male was stooping down to pick it up, she snatched one of the tool cases off of his cart and ran off into a dark alleyway, disappearing from sight. From here, Miggie traveled to the edge of the city, where the hags had told her the interplanetary space cruisers were housed. It was dark, and the dock where the vehicles were stationed looked deserted. Miggie tiptoed past a sleeping security guard and selected a ship that looked small enough to pilot solo, but powerful enough to protect her from hostile males. It had the shape of a silver saucer, covered in gun turrets and retractable spikes. Miggie crept over to the ship and removed one of its panels with her tools. Then, crawled inside, before resecuring the panel from within. She was careful to replace the panel behind her, and then solder its edges tightly. The walls of the interior of the ship were comprised of a number of interlocking bronze panels. The ceilings were made of a clear plastic and glowed blue with unseen rows of electric lights. The floors were covered in a blanket of plush, slightly glossy, and rubbery fabric. Miggie walked through a hallway past a number of silver doors, labeled by different-colored neon signs. Most were marked with a number and were probably sleeping quarters for the residents of the ship during long voyages. Miggie gathered some courage and then peered inside one of the numbered doors to confirm this suspicion. 2 sets of bunk beds, a work desk, and a chest of drawers were built into the walls of this cramped room. Thankfully, however, the room was unoccupied. No males were hiding here, waiting for the right moment to burst forth and tackle her to the ground. Miggie exited the room and continued moving down the hallway. During the Festival of Union, Miggie remembered Hag Josnia say,
"The soldiers on warships all return to the planet to take a wife. It is the only day you will see the ships in the launch yard, unoccupied."
Miggie smiled, very relieved to discover that this piece of advice seemed to be accurate. The ship was quiet and appeared to be empty. Miggie crept to the end of the hallway and into a circular control room. There was a large curved window here, looking out into the shipyard. In front of that was a control panel lined with rows of complicated buttons and levers. A large high-backed metal chair on a swivel sat in front of the control panel. This was the captain's chair, surrounded by control panels on 3 sides, and placed before the dead center of the ship's vast, curved windshield. The chair seemed to bristle with a forbidden energy as Miggie ran one green hand along its shiny red surface. Miggie grinned, and then sat down in the chair, feeling alive. For a moment, the terror she felt was shoved back by a wave of surreal exhilaration. She put her hand on the clutch of the ship. Her green fingers gripped the red ball at its tip, with an almost erogenous voraciousness. And then, she activated the launch sequence. She pushed the blue button on the launch panel, and then, the red one, just as Hag Josnia had taught her many years ago, and just as she had practiced, again and again and again. The pictures in her books were nothing compared with the real thing. They held no power and no meaning. They didn't feel cold under the tips of her fingers. They didn't make steel clinks as she pressed them down. And in the next instant, Miggie found herself hurtling through the atmosphere, grinning like a deranged psychopath. A neon sign near the corner of the ship's vast, curved windshield caught her eye. The sign read, "The Devastia is in launch mode. Please be seated." My God, Miggie thought with a grin as the ship broke through the atmosphere and slowed to a horizontal projection. Stars and planets surrounded her on all sides. It was more terrifying and more beautiful than she had ever imagined. This is the Devastia. I'm on Captain Troust's ship, the Devastia. Wouldn't Adare be jealous?